In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to read characters, integers, and doubles that the user enters via the command prompt. And the first thing that you should note is that we have included the standard library header. We need this because we're going to be using conversion functions, such as the one that we learned a couple of tutorials ago that converts from an ASCII string to an integer. Alright, so we're going to create three functions, and let's call them read character, read integer, and read double. And let's create our first one, which is the simplest one for reading a single character that the user enters in the command prompt. So of course this one will return a character, and we'll call it read character. And this function only takes one line of code to write. If you remember from a couple of tutorials ago, we used the getC function to get a single character from standard input, which is the command prompt. So all we have to do is return getC standard input. Alright, so let's just test this and make sure that it works. We're going to print out a character, and we're going to print out the result from this function. Alright, so let's run this code. Yeah, way too many tabs open. Alrighty, and we'll run the code, and it's blinking at us, which means it wants us to input something. So we'll enter the character Y, and it prints back out the character Y to us. Usually we would want to read a single character from the user for the answer to a yes or no question, or they have to enter a single number, like 1 through 9, or 0 through 9. Alright, so the next function will read an integer, and this one's a little bit more complicated. Of course, it returns an integer, and we will call it readInt. And the first thing we need to do is to create a string where we're going to store the characters that they enter. Now, most likely, since we're using C, the largest integer that we're going to be working with is around 4 billion. And 4 billion is a 4 with 9 zeros, so that's 10 characters. So the largest integer that we're going to possibly read in could only be 10 characters long. So we need to create a string to hold 10 characters, plus 1 for the null terminator. So let's create the string, and it'll be a total of 11 characters, since we need 1 for the null terminator. Now what we need is the fgets function that we used a couple of tutorials ago that will read a string from user input, and we'll put it into the string that we've created here. And that's fgets, and we need to give it the name of the string to read the characters into. We need to tell it the number of characters to read, and in this case we have 11 characters that we want to read, and I'm going to explain that in just one second. And we're reading it from standard input, or the terminal. Alright, so if this string has 11 characters, and we're reading in 11 characters, where are we going to put the new line character? Where are we going to put the null terminator character? Because if they enter 11 integers, if they enter 11 characters, then it's going to read those 11 characters in, and we're going to have no null terminator, which means that we can't use our string very easily. However, this function does not read in 11 characters. It always reads in the number that you give it here, minus 1. So as soon as it gets to the 10th character, it's going to stop reading characters, and it's going to put the null terminator at the end of the string. And if it gets to the new line character before it reads in 10 characters, and the new line character means that the user hit the enter key to submit the data, it's also going to stop reading, and it's going to input that new line followed by a \0, followed by the null terminator. So even though it looks like we wouldn't have enough space to store all the characters, this will work. So we've now read the characters into the string, and now we need to convert it to an integer. So we used the a_to_i function, which converts an ASCII string to an integer. And all we need to give it is that string that we're going to convert to an integer. And then if all went well, we should be able to return this variable I, which returns the integer, and now our function should be complete. So let's change this a little bit. and see if it works. Alright, compile the code and we'll run it again. And again, it's waiting for us to enter something. So let's enter the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 9 characters. And that works. Let's see if it works with smaller ones as well. And it appears to work fine. Now let's give it the maximum limit. Let's enter the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. That should be 10 characters. And when we hit enter, it does work. So now we've created the second function that will convert from a string to an integer, and it gets the string from user input. Alright, so we have one more function to create, and it's very similar to this function, so I'm going to copy this entire function and paste it in here, and I'm just going to make some changes. First of all, this one returns a double, so I need to change that there and here. I need to change a couple more things. That is, this is a double, and I'm going to call it D. And we no longer use the a2i function because this converts a string to an integer. Instead, we need to convert the string to a floating point number, or a double, and that is a2f. The only other thing that we might want to change is that the integers could only be possibly 10 characters long maximum, whereas the doubles can be significantly longer. So let's change this here to give it a maximum of 128 characters to read. Now, if it reaches the new line first, it won't continue to read, so we'll still be good. And floating point numbers can usually have a lot of precision, but chances are, if we're having the user input a number, they're really probably not ever going to enter a number with more than maybe 8 or 16 characters. But we're creating this function to be reused in other places potentially, so the bigger this number is, the more likely that your function is going to work well. So now we just need to change this to D. So we basically have the same structure as this function. We've just changed all the references to integers to references to doubles. So now let's call this function and print it out. This time we'll read a double. Alright, so we'll compile it and run it. And let's enter 3.14. And as you can see, it gives us the answer with the extra precision that we technically don't always want. But as you can see, it works. And let's enter a couple other ones. 0 gives us the floating point version of 0. Or let's give it a longer one. And it still gives us the right answer. Alright, so in this tutorial we created 3 functions, one to read a character, one to read an integer, and one to read a double, all from user input. I hope you have learned something and that you can use some of these functions elsewhere in your code, and I will see you again next time.